All right, so in this first one, what we're going to do is we're going to solve for x. So we solve by square roots for this one. And the reason why I know that is because we have things called perfect squares, right? Perfect squares. And perfect squares are numbers that if you multiply them together, you're going to produce another number. But it's if you multiply it by itself. So for instance, 1 times 1 gives us 1, 2 times 2 gives us 4, 3 times 3 gives us 9, 4 times 4 gives us 16, and hopefully you recognize this list, okay? So these are the perfect squares that you normally have memorized. So over here on this first problem, we've got x squared equals 25. Well, 25 is a perfect square. So we can take the square root of both sides because the opposite of squaring is taking the square root. And when we do that, this is going to become an x. And the square root of 25, if I type it into my calculator, go into my calculator for my TI-83, and I'm going to type second x squared. I'm going to type 25, close parentheses, and hit enter. And that's going to give me 5. So I'm not just going to have positive 5, but I'm also going to have negative 5. So the reason why I'm going to have that happen is because isn't 5 times 5 equal to 25? Yeah, but isn't also negative 5 times negative 5 also 25? Yes. So whenever you take a square root of a value, you've got to make sure that it is positive and negative on your answer. So if you get that, go ahead and try number 2, which is that x squared equals 36. And if you're watching this video, then you would pause the video, try it on your own. But since y'all are live, we're going to take the square root of both sides for this one. And the square root of 36 is going to be 6. And x is going to equal positive and negative 6. Because again, we're remembering that if we take the square root of something, there's going to be a positive and a negative value. Okay? So, on that mini lesson portion, we're going to take it up a notch. It's not just going to be straight, hey, take the square root of both sides. We're going to have to manipulate it just a little bit. So on number 1, we've got x squared minus 25 equals 0. The way I'm going to recognize that I'm going to be taking the square roots is not only that this number right here is going to be a perfect square, but we're also going to be missing our b term. And what I mean by that is when we have that standard form, we're going to be missing this term. Notice how there's nothing in between here that has just an x. So what we're going to do is move the numbers to one side and the x value to the other. So we're going to add 25 to both sides. And that's going to give me x squared equals 25. And now this problem has just turned like what we did in the last problem. We're going to take the square root of both sides, and that's going to give us x equals positive negative 5. You should always take these numbers and plug them back into your equation. So if I put 5 back in here, I'm going to get 5 squared minus 25, and that's going to equal 0. And then if I put in negative 5 in here, I'm going to get negative 5 squared minus 25, and that's also going to equal 0. All right, so on number 2, this one's a little different. So on number 2, we want our x's on one side and our numbers on the other. And right now we notice that this c term right here is a perfect square, right? 16 is a perfect square. So we're going to add 16 and put it over to the other side. And we're going to have 4x squared equals 16. Now, are all of my numbers on one side and my x's on the other? No. We've got to divide both sides to get rid of this 4. So we're going to divide by 4 on both sides. And what do we notice? Well, 16 divided by 4 gives us 4. And 4 is a perfect square, which is awesome for us. So we're going to take the square root of both sides, and x is going to equal positive and negative 2. Okay? You can pause the video and try number 3 if you would like. All right, so number 3, we've got 8x squared minus 40 equals 0. And so we first want to add 40 to the other side. And that's going to give us 8x squared equals 40. Now we want our numbers on one side and our x's on the other. So we're going to divide by 8 on both sides. And x squared is going to equal 40 divided by 8, which is 5. Now, in this instance, we don't have a perfect square on this side. Like, if you take the square root of 5 and put that in my calculator, we're going to have a decimal, right? So it's going to be like roughly 2.23. So when we write this out, we're going to just leave it underneath the radical, okay? Because that's in our most simplest form, okay? There's another way to do this, and I just want to kind of mention it just a little bit. So there's another way to do this, and you can factor out a GCF before you really kind of get into solving it. So what I mean by that is, look at these two factors or these two numbers over here. What's their greatest common factor? Well, if I divide 8 by 8 and I divide 40 by 8, this is what I'm going to get. So I pulled out an 8 from both of these terms, and I'm left with this. Now I can just divide both sides by 8, which is going to result in x squared minus 5 equals 0. And then I can add 5 to both sides and then take the square root. So just like what we did over here, just a different way to do it. Okay, so those are two options. Sometimes it's a little easier to factor out a GCF because then you can see the rest of this process. So you can do it either way. It's the same thing, just in a different order. All right, so let's talk about number 4. Number 4 is really important. So I'm going to erase this really quick. And I can go back to it in just a second if you need me to. On number 4, we have x squared plus 25 equals 0. So we already know that we're going to use solving by square roots because we don't have a b term. Remember, we don't have a b term. Non-existent. It's not here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move my number to the other side, but I got to subtract it, right? And so that's going to give me x squared equals negative 25. All right, so now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. But wait a minute. I can't take the square root of a negative number. Because when I go into my calculator and I type the square root of negative 25, it gives me this non-real answer. Okay? So when I do this, I'm going to get no real solution. Okay? Because of this negative that's underneath the radical. So if there's a negative underneath, then it's going to be no real solution. Okay? Got to keep that in mind. This is going to introduce complex numbers a little bit later on. We're going to get into that like in about a week and a half. So just keep that in mind. But for right now, if you have a negative underneath the radical, this is what you write. No real solution. Don't say no solution. No real solution. And the reason why it's not real is because it's not a number, like you could not produce a number that if you multiplied it by itself, it would get you negative 25. For instance, if you had 5 times 5, that gives you 25, right? And if you had 5 times negative 5, that would give you negative 25. And if you had negative 5 times negative 5, that would give you positive 25. Now here's the issue. This is a perfect square, and this is a perfect square. But this guy right here, that's not going to work because in order for you to take the square root of something, it breaks it down into a number that repeats itself. You multiply it by itself. Okay? So that's why we've got this no real answer. All right? So for your independent practice, what I want you to do is pause the video and then try it on your own. These problems are exactly like what we did in the mini lesson, but I want you to try them and then you can check your work. All right, so on number 5, what you're going to do is you're going to notice that you're going to be able to solve by square roots because this is a perfect square right here. So you're going to add 36 to both sides. You're also going to notice that you can solve by square roots because you don't have a b term. And then you're going to take the square root of both sides, which is going to give you positive and negative 6. Hopefully you got that right. If you did not, make sure that you check back on those first couple of problems that we worked through. All right, so number 6, you should have gotten, you want to make sure that you put your numbers on one side and your x's on the other. So you're going to add 9 to both sides, and you're going to have 3x squared equals 9. And you're going to divide by 3 on both sides, and that's going to give you x squared equals positive 3. And you want to get the x by itself. So you're going to take the square root of both sides, and that's going to give you x equals positive and negative. And since you can't take the square root of 3 and get a whole number, you're just going to leave that guy underneath the radical. All right. On number 7, there's a couple different ways you can do this one, but I'm going to show you the way that I like. I like to move the c term over, so I'm going to add 35 to both sides. And 5x squared equals 35. You're going to divide by 5 on both sides. You're going to get x squared equals 7. Go and take the square root. X equals positive and negative 7. Okay. I'm going to go back and erase number 5 really quick. And last one, because we're awesome and fantastic and we know math. Number 8, we've got x squared plus 36 equals 0. So we want to move that 36 to the other side. So we're going to subtract 36 from both sides. And that's going to give me x squared equals negative 36. Now, if we take the square root of both sides, what's going to happen is you're going to get a not real solution. No real solution. Okay, and that is what you have to write. You have to put this part about the real. Okay? Sorry, that circling got a little intense. All right? So just keep that in mind. When you have a negative underneath the radical, you're going to have a no real solution. So once you feel pretty comfortable with this, and once you feel pretty comfortable with factoring, go ahead and make sure that you take the quiz that is on your Teacher's E-Class page. It's already open, but you have until Friday to take it, so just keep that in mind.